Good evening. Good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming to this third of our series of Journey Talks. I'm Bryce McFadden, one of the pastors here at the church. And we've had two talks before this, and they've always been very interesting and enlightening. And I think the subject of boundaries is such a huge topic, and doesn't matter what you're talking about in life, what area of need, it seems like boundaries is such a practical topic. And so hopefully tonight this is good for you as well. There are handouts, so I think everybody's got handouts. Everybody got them? Okay. We'll try and catch others as they come in as well. Tonight there's going to be Q&A time at the end, and those are always fun times because you come in here maybe with your own circumstances and situations, and you're going, where does boundaries play a part in this? So I'm going to encourage you, if you have a question for Wendy, she's got the answer. Just kidding. Putting the pressure on her now, huh? But anyway, it'll be helpful if you just even raise the question. I'm going to run a mic around, so during our Q&A time, that'll make it easier for you. Our speaker tonight is Wendy Summers. She is a licensed mental health counselor. She works for City Care Counseling at the Old Mill campus in Omaha. And just a couple things about Wendy. She, prior to becoming a counselor, she co-founded Omaha's Rhythm and Hues Studio of Fine Arts. And she spent over 30 years teaching children and adults. I assume that was music, right? Art. Okay. For some reason, I was thinking music, but art. Oh, music and art. Okay. I thought, music is art too, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll get it straight. Anyway, that's pretty cool. And by the way, Wendy's husband, John, is with her tonight too. So they both are artists, by the way. So I was in Wendy's office and saw some really cool paintings on the wall. They both have those incredible gifts, so that's really cool. I did ask Wendy, because I like to do this, I like to find something out about the speaker that it just not necessarily something included in their talk, something kind of extra and risky sometimes. I asked Wendy, what's the craziest thing you have ever done without facing prison time? Well, she came back with something that was not illegal, but very adventurous. She loves exploring caves. And whether it be mud caves or something a little more extravagant with the stalagmites and stalactites, she finds beauty and serenity in the caves. And she talked about one of her most adventurous endeavors, and she was with family members for this one at a cave in Arkansas. And it was known as the Wild Cave Tour. And one of the draws on this tour was to actually go into the cave and discover an underground bottomless lake. And so to experience that, her family, they all had to put on helmets. And these were well-worn helmets that were missing the leather straps. So in place of that were just pieces of thread, basically, or yarn. And to get to this lake, they had to literally hug a rock wall for hours as they inched their way along a ledge high above the bottomless lake. And I was thinking, you tend to appreciate life more when it's just hanging by a thread. Oh, that was bad. Okay. I tried. Anyway. Wendy said it was both terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. So now you know our speaker has an adventurous spirit. She's here tonight, and she is very qualified to speak to us on boundaries. So would you give Wendy a warm welcome? Thanks, Wendy.
Is this on? Oh, now it is. Okay. Thank you, Bryce. Yeah, that was, my sister is one of the family members of my husband who were with me at that, and they still haven't forgiven me because I was the one that signed us up for the tour. Okay, So yes, boundaries. That's what we're going to talk about just for a little while. I'll just tell you a little bit about me. Bryce had the fun stuff. The more boring stuff is I earned my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Kansas City Art Institute. That was back in the 80s. And then I went to Grace, not in the 80s, a couple decades ago, I guess. And I currently work at CityCare. I work with all different populations. I like to work with children and teens, adults, singles, couples. I love working with people on the autism spectrum. So prior to that, I owned Rhythm and Hues with my mom and my sister, who are here, and it was a labor of love. I also taught in the Millard Public School System for 10 years or so. I was as an art teacher, and I was busy. I was really busy, especially while raising kids, but art is therapeutic, and that was one of the things that helped me get through it. And eventually it became so therapeutic that I went back to school in my 40s, and COVID came, and we closed our studio, and I kind of just transitioned into full-time counseling. So it was a windy road getting to be a counselor at CityCare, but I love it, and I sometimes get to use art in my practice, and these are a few of the things I am, my professional identity. These are things I am. Something I am not is a professional boundary setter. So you'll see that, but hopefully this will still be very informative and interesting. So, okay, so if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so the little stop sign. I love that. Can you see it? Am I in the way? I don't know. Should I move this down lower? So I found that picture just shortly after I was asked to speak on boundaries, and I did a little screenshot on my phone, and I thought, yep, this is how my relationship with boundaries sometimes looks. And actually, I was originally asked to speak on anxiety, and I was really excited about that topic because I'm really familiar with anxiety, both professionally and personally. So I'm like, oh yeah, anxiety, I can do that. But then some things changed, and they asked me to talk about boundaries, and in my mind, I'm like, oof, boundaries. No, that's not a good topic for me. I'm not really very good at boundaries. And so in my mind, and Joe was there, I think. Nope, thank you anyway, I'll set this one out. But obviously, what came out of my mouth was, sure. So I believe all things happen for a reason, and I am really happy to be here, and I know that Journey Church and CityCare, we share a similar passion for equipping people, and so I got busy just kind of gathering up all my boundaries information. I got some new resources, and these are the categories that I kind of figured I would break things down into. So we'll talk about what boundaries are, what they're not. We'll take a closer look with just some easy to remember visual aids. We'll talk about hindrances to boundary setting. We'll talk about steps for setting healthy boundaries, boundaries with children, boundary violations. We'll do some what ifs, some kind of special situations, and then we'll have some Q&A. And I'll do my best to answer the questions. But again, not professional boundary setter, I'm here to kind of unpack some of these things with you. Okay, so we can do the next slide. Okay, that's my family. So I gave you a professional life, some details about that. So my personal life, just a few things for context. So I grew up here in Omaha with my parents and my 3 younger sisters. I met my husband, John, in high school. We went to college together, and we got married 37 years ago. As aspiring artists in art school, we were taught to think outside the box, just kind of push those boundaries, just push the boundaries. And we did, but there's this people pleaser in me too, and so there was some internal struggle, like how do you push the boundaries and please people, and it was a whole big thing. But thankfully, I've continued to learn and grow in this, and so here we are. So after many years in the corporate world, my husband, now he gets to work as a full-time artist. That's why I have so many paintings in my office, that's a gift. We have 3 grown sons, a beautiful daughter-in-law, a beautiful soon-to-be daughter-in-law, because our middle son's getting married next year, and 4 amazing grandchildren who truly are the light of my world. So the reason I really wanted to share this is because this photo represents, and I know I'm in the way, among other things, it represents countless opportunities to set boundaries, push boundaries, respect boundaries, and all things boundaries. So I'll say in the boundaries department, I have had some really good successes with these people, and they will say it. I've had some failures too. But as a work in progress, I'm thankful for this little thing called neuroplasticity, which some of you maybe know that word. It's one of my favorite words once I learned it. It's our brain's ability to learn and grow based on our experiences. So our bodies, as we age, they kind of peak and deteriorate a little bit, but we know that our brains can continue to incorporate new information and just learn throughout our lifetimes. And this is really good news. So, okay, so that's that. Now here we go. We'll get on with the boundaries. Yes. So, boundaries, what are they? Oh, in your handout, there's so much information, and I didn't know what would be most interesting to you, so I just left some lines at the top. If you want to take some notes, you can do that, especially when it comes to what boundaries are and what they aren't. There's a lot of misinformation. I had a lot of just misunderstandings about them. So I'll just kind of tell you, when I put all my resources together, this is kind of what my brain spit out. They're personal property lines that define where we end and someone else begins. They help us take responsibility for our own feelings and our responses to those feelings, while also allowing others to be responsible for theirs. Boundaries are limits we set for ourselves and others to protect our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. They help us say yes to the good and no to the bad. So I read that just because I wanted to get that whole definition out there. That's not what I thought boundaries were at all. So when I first, started thinking about boundaries years ago, early in my life. But there's two types. There's internal, and so these exist within our thoughts, our feelings, our values. Sometimes they involve our triggers. Anything that's going on in our head, we can be setting an internal boundary. And then there are the external boundaries, which are going to involve behaviors, actions, environment, just things that are outside of us. And I really like these P words: protect, promote, prevent, and provide. So to unpack that a little bit, protecting and promoting emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, this is what boundaries can do. They can act as a tool for maintaining health and wholeness. They define what is ours to manage, which is our emotions, our responses to our emotions, including our behaviors stemming from those emotions. They can prevent burnout by helping us to create healthier relationships. They can build trust, safety, respect. They allow us to love others without enabling dysfunction. So good boundaries provide freedom, not control. There's a difference between good and bad boundaries, but good boundaries provide freedom. They allow us to say yes to what's healthy and no to what's harmful. Good, healthy boundaries empower us to live from a place of confidence and not from guilt. If there's guilt involved, that's an indicator that's maybe not a good boundary. Or just, it's an indicator that some personal reflection maybe needs to take place. So in a nutshell, promote, prevent, did I do it right? Protect, promote, prevent, provide. So that's my little summary about the definition of boundaries. Okay, so this next one, if you're going to go to the next slide, this is my favorite slide. And I'm going to try to stay on script here, because otherwise I'll talk about it for 2 hours, and nobody wants that. So I just feel like a picture or some kind of visual aid can really help us kind of unpack or just think through things a little bit differently. And if it's true that boundaries lead to healthier relationships and improved emotional well-being, it makes sense to really try to figure this out in a way that works for us. So these visual aids, these are just a few of my favorite that a couple of them are pretty old. This door one is a newer one, which I love. I wish I would have known about that years ago, but still learning. So the first one is this little hand-brain thing, and some of you guys might be familiar with Dr. Dan Siegel. If you know me, you've heard me talk about this before, so some of you, this is something that you've heard a million times, but it was a game changer to me, so I just share it with anybody who will listen. And if you like it, you can just look up Dr. Dan Siegel. I think I put his name on the back of or on the handout somewhere. And he can give you a longer version. He has like an hour-long version where he really describes it, or a 2-minute version. So I just do the description that works best for me. So here's what we do. We hold up our hand, and we can kind of visualize what's going on in our brain. And you can do this if you want to. You don't have to. But this is supposed to be a handy model of your brain. And this is your neck, your brain stem down here. This is right back here. And then this is the part of our brain that controls our things we don't even really think about. It's what we're not really even consciously aware of, our heart beating, our blinking, swallowing, things like that. Then this part right here, this is your thumb represents the limbic system, especially your amygdala right here. And so it controls like emotions, memories, survival instincts. This is the part that can get flooded when we're experiencing a lot of negative or positive emotions. It could be, sadness or anger, something really uncomfortable that makes it hard to think, or it might even be something really excited, like we're just so excited we can't even sit still. Our brain is flooded. And so then what can happen, according to this little model, I got to tell you about the top part. This is the cortical part of our brain. This is the thinking part of our brain, and your two fingers right here can represent your prefrontal cortex. And so this is the part that controls how we think about what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. So when there's a lot going on down here, the top part of our brain, it's like Dan Siegel says, it's like we flip our lid. And it's hard to be emotionally regulated and think objective, clear thoughts at the same time because our brain is disintegrated. When it's like this represents a fully integrated brain that everything's working together. We're operating we can think, and we can, even if we're feeling some really negative emotions, we can think about how we want to respond to them. But when we flip our lid, or sometimes I think about it like it's kind of like our brain goes offline, it is really, really hard to, well, certainly you can't set a good boundary when you're dysregulated like that, but it's hard to respond to somebody else's boundary. It's just hard to, well, pretty much do anything. I used to think that in order to get my brain back online, like I didn't have this, that we could just talk ourselves into feeling better. That doesn't work. It's almost as if our brain speaks two different languages. We've got our emotions and we've got our cognitive, our thinking brain, and if they're not speaking the same language, or if we're dysregulated, doesn't matter how, what good thing we have to say to our brain, it's not going to get to the part that really needs to be calmed down. So what I've learned is that speaking to this midbrain, you can do that by identifying your emotions, by doing some grounding exercises, doing some mindfulness exercises. I know Katie talked about some of those different things when she was here. If you didn't hear it, you can find it on Journey's YouTube platform. Is that what you say? Is it YouTube platform? I don't know. I know about the brain a little bit, but I don't know about technology. But I know it's on YouTube because I watched it. But, okay, so you can do that. So basically, knowing this will help us understand what's going on in our brains. This little model shows that self-regulation means learning to close the lid again, calming the emotional brain so the thinking brain can come back online. Used to be, like if I was anxious, I'd say, don't be anxious, you got this. Didn't matter, couldn't hear it. So I had to then kind of calm my brain down so I could be less anxious, and then I could think about how I wanted to respond to whatever emotions I was feeling. So being dysregulated is something that happens when we're confronted by a boundary or we're trying to set a boundary in the heat of the moment, and it's not good. So if this is happening, whether it's boundary related or any, our brain's working all the time. So it's just a little handy tool to remember. So I introduce that to anybody who will listen. Bottom line, an objective, integrated, regulated brain will help us set and adhere to healthy boundaries and better deal with unhealthy ones. Okay, so that's that one. The second one is a ranch. It's a ranch, and this was something I heard one time, long time ago, when I was in a class taught by Terry Wardle. He is, He's a Christian author, speaker, counselor, former seminary professor, and he suggests we imagine our life like a ranch. And I love this. This is a good visual for me. So we are responsible for everything inside the ranch, our emotions, our decisions, our values, our time, our energies, our energy. And that's really the only thing that we can take responsibility for and really have control over. We don't even often have control over all that stuff, but that's our responsibility. So our ranch has a fence around it, and the fence represents our boundaries. Inside the fence is everything we're responsible for. Outside the fence is what other people are responsible for. Their feelings, their choices, their problems, their expectations. Now, if my fence is broken down, or if it doesn't exist, people can come in, they can dump their problems or their dysfunction on my ranch. They can just come in whenever they want. They might tell me how I should feel, how I should believe, how I should act. I might feel overwhelmed, resentful, or exhausted, because now I've got all these things on my ranch, on my property, that aren't mine, and they're not really meant to be mine. If my fence is too high or too thick, or it has barbed wire, I might be isolated, unreachable. I might be unable to experience intimacy or connection with the people in my life. I'm protecting myself, but at the cost of loneliness and destruction. So I kind of like that because it gives us just a way of kind of thinking about, it's good to have a fence, but is it too high or too low? And then, of course, you need a gate. You need a gate that's clear. You can open it, you can close it, you can let people in when you want to, you can close the gate when you don't want people to come in. You can have lots of gates if you want. Some people like lots of gates, and some people just have 1 or 2 gates. It's really up to you. But thinking of it as a gate, I think, gives us just I don't know, a good way of thinking about our ability to be in charge of who comes in and out of our ranch. Okay, yep, so good boundaries mean I'm responsible for me, you're responsible for you. I'm responsible for what's in my ranch, you're responsible for what's outside of my ranch. Okay, then the other one, and I love this one so much, this is access, and I just kind of represented it with a door. And so I was recently introduced to this concept, to the concept of access in relationships. I was reading a book that was recommended to me by another counselor, and it's Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa TerKeurst. And I was kind of reluctant to read that book because, well, it's just the word boundaries anyway, and I knew she'd had a hard time, and I just thought it was going to be real preachy about you just need to get toxic people out of your life. That's not what the book is about at all. It's a really good book. And she talks about love, how love can be unconditional, but relational access never should be unconditional. So she points out that our phones are protected by passcodes, our bank accounts and streaming accounts are protected by passwords. I don't usually remember the passwords, but I know they're there. Our homes are protected by locked doors, even security systems, but some of us are not really good when it comes to protecting our hearts. Or sometimes, Katie mentioned in her talk last time, we overprotect our hearts. And again, that's kind of like having a fence that's too tall or it's barbed wire or something, and that just leads to isolation. So finding that balance, you can sometimes think about it as how much access am I giving to this person in this relationship. Okay, so when you think about access to your home, you might give a trusted neighbor, you might give, somebody a family member, like your house key or your garage code. But we're discerning about how much access we give to people. We wouldn't just let all of Gretna or all of Omaha come into our house. We choose who gets this amount of access, who gets that amount of access. So, I mean, the concept of access we're really familiar with because we do it all the time. But in relationships, there tends to be a belief that unconditional love means unconditional access. And we might give a friend unconditional access to all of our secrets, for example, only to find out that she's telling them to people when we didn't want her to. Or we might give a teacher or a boss unconditional access to our self-esteem based on our successes or our failures at work. And we might allow their opinion of us to shape us, and we've given them too much access then. We might give a loved one unconditional access to our happiness. This might look like codependent behavior, in which a lot of energy is spent trying to make sure the other person's okay. Like my happiness is dependent on their happiness, and if they're not healthy, whether it's addiction or due to any number of things, their happiness may not come. So I like the idea just of being intentional about how much access we give to others. Healthy, trust-filled relationships are worthy of a lot more access, much greater access than the chaotic relationships. And so we get to choose how much access we allow. And that was just kind of a new way to look at it for me, and so I kind of represent it with the door. You can open the door, close the door, but that's access. So in these things, if one of these really resonates with you and you want to talk more about it later during the Q&A, we can, because I think they're really good ones. So, okay, so next slide. This one is the hindrances to healthy boundaries. So it's good to think through the hindrances when our brains are online, when we're not emotionally charged, when our lids are not flipped, when we can think about things objectively. I like this picture too. That was probably the most fun part of preparing for this, was finding ridiculous pictures of boundaries. So, yes. So planning ahead, when we're thinking clearly, can be really vital. So if you're a parent, you know the frustration of trying to set boundaries on the fly when our lids are flipped, when our kids' lids are flipped, when everybody's dysregulated, and we may have a different idea of what boundary we should be setting. If our partner has a completely other idea of the boundary, or it's nothing challenges us quite like these moments when we're trying to figure this out on the fly. So here are some common myths and hindrances just to think through in advance that might help us kind of just set some healthy boundaries. So hopefully it will be helpful. All right, so the first one is boundaries are selfish. In truth, healthy boundaries aren't selfish, and they're essential for love and respect. Healthy boundaries honor both you and the other person, and by clarifying where responsibility lies. Love without boundaries quickly turns into resentment, exhaustion, and enabling. And I don't know, you just kind of have to take my word for it, but I do have some good resources that are kind of supporting it. So we'll kind of talk a little bit more through this, but boundaries are selfish. Nope, that's a myth, that's not true. Boundaries harm relationships, also a myth. The truth is boundaries actually protect and strengthen healthy relationships. They create safety and trust because both people know what's okay and what's not okay. So if we are trusting that we're both on the same page, we can, and we both have the same ideas of what's healthy and okay, the relationship just is just easier, actually, less chaotic. So chaotic here, lack of boundaries leads to chaos, mistrust, and relational breakdowns, not the other way around. The other myth is boundaries are rigid and controlling. Truth is, good boundaries are flexible, kind, and respectful. They're not walls or prisons. Like a fence with gates, boundaries allow flow and connection, not harsh isolation. So, and this is the one I really thought was true. I really thought that if somebody says, yeah, I'm setting a boundary, that meant they were trying to control me. And that was probably a bad boundary. That's why it felt like control. But good boundaries, flexible, kind, and respectful. Okay, and boundaries don't work. The truth is, bad boundaries don't work. Kids test boundaries. That's developmentally appropriate. We'll talk a little bit more about kids. Adults test boundaries. We test boundaries, but bottom line, if we've had problems with boundaries, the problem might not be the boundary. So, okay, here's a couple other things that can interfere, and most of these things apply to somebody. Lots of them applied to me, working on it. But fear of rejection or abandonment might be something that hinders you from setting a boundary. So worrying that if you say no or set a limit, people will leave or get upset. This may be one of those beliefs that feels true, but may not actually be true. That's often the case. Or it may be a result of actual real-life experience. Maybe setting a boundary has led to fear or has led to rejection or abandonment. But it doesn't always. So that's something that some of us, we carry, that we just are worried that that's what's going to happen. And it might just be something that feels true and may not actually be true. Okay, then there's guilt, feeling like you're being selfish, mean, or too much for having needs. Overcoming feelings of guilt can be tricky when setting boundaries, especially in relationships where there has been a history of enabling healthy behaviors. So guilt is, some of these are deep. I'm just kind of going over the high-level view of these. But just saying, oh, don't feel guilty, well, that's not realistic. But if this is something that you're struggling with, it may be good to just do some self-reflection, get some, talk it through with somebody, because healthy boundaries show that we are for healthy relationships, not the other way around. So guilt sometimes is misplaced. Okay, so low self-esteem is another hindrance sometimes. Believing your needs don't matter as much as others' needs. So this is tricky. It could be the result of a lie-based core belief that might need to be addressed with a counselor. A lie-based core belief might start to take place when you're really young, and then just experiences and years over time, it just gets reinforced over and over and over again. But believing that our needs are not as important as others, it can look like putting others' needs first. So that's a tricky one too. It can look like that. But if it's not coming from a healthy place, it's not the same thing. And I think this is something that a lot of us struggle with. Just how do we respect others' needs and put other needs first in a way that is coming from a good place rather than an unhealthy place. So, and then people-pleasing habits. That is, all these kind of tie together. It's kind of like taking salt out of soup sometimes. It's hard to know exactly which one, but hopefully just thinking through them like this might shed some light on maybe this might be something I need to think more about. So people-pleasing, automatically putting others' comfort or happiness ahead of your own. So it's different that people-pleasing is different than pleasing people. And I love this. This was a Henry Cloud thing. He's one of the guys that wrote the Boundaries book. He said, ask yourself, are you giving or are you giving in? Bless you. So are you giving or are you giving in? So, for example, he uses an example. I think I heard this on a podcast. I don't know if it was in one of his books. It was a podcast, I think. But so somebody asks you what you're doing Monday night. And so this could be you or maybe not. But sometimes it's been me. What are you doing Monday night? I don't know. I'll tell you Tuesday morning. I'll tell you what I'm doing Monday night. Where other people might say, oh, yeah, I'm going to have dinner with my husband. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do this. But sometimes other people, you don't make a plan because you want to be available for whatever, somebody else's plan. So the bottom line here is people-pleasing in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We come by it honestly. Our brains are wired for this. Secure attachment bonds happen when other people are happy to be with us. When we've done something to make them happy and they're happy to be with us, that's good. I mean, that's how our brains grow and how we create secure attachments. However, it can get internalized in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot more to this, really, but I think a good way to look at it is, are we giving or are we giving in? If it's just the motivation is a little bit different and important, I think, to help us kind of differentiate that. Lack of practice. So that's the next one. If you grew up without examples of healthy boundaries, you might not even know where to start. That could definitely be a hindrance. Fear of conflict. Setting a boundary sometimes leads to tough conversations, and that can feel really scary. And if anybody else in here is conflict averse, like I am, you can relate to this. I don't want conflict. I like peace. I don't want it. But so sometimes that gets in the way of setting a healthy boundary, and it's actually then you get the opposite of what you want. You don't have peace. You have chaos because you didn't set a boundary. Internalized beliefs. This is another one that gets tricky. Like an internalized belief might be, good friends are always available. Family comes first, no matter what. Love means sacrifice. I mean, inherently, those things are not bad. But again, if we're giving in rather than just giving, that might be based on a belief that feels true, but may not always be true. And then the trauma history. This is a really weighty topic. And I wish we could talk more about this too, but it's one I don't want to talk too much about it because everybody comes from a different place when it comes to trauma. But if boundaries were ignored, or if we were punished for having boundaries, or if it's unsafe to have boundaries, if this happened to us earlier in life, it can make boundary setting feel dangerous now. So healing, obviously, from trauma can take time. But if you know that your relationship with boundaries is difficult due to trauma, that knowledge alone might help you make some changes today. So the long-term healing, of course, can be challenging, but just that insight, I think, sometimes when we have some insight like that, or we do a little bit of self-reflection, we can say, I know it's about my trauma, I know I'm being triggered here, but I'm still going to set this boundary because it's good and it's not bad. It works if I set the right boundary. So, and the last one here that I found when I was kind of doing this research is societal or cultural beliefs. So some cultures or groups heavily emphasize self-sacrifice, obedience, collectivism over individual needs. And of course, these things, like all the others, that's why it's so tricky, because in and of themselves, they may not be inherently wrong or bad. But there's wisdom in understanding the why, what's behind it. So those are the hindrances. So I guess we're ready for the next slide. This one is the practical steps. So knowing what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for, sometimes this is the first big thing, just understanding this. If you're feeling like you're responsible for what's on other people's ranches, that's where you start. You're like, nope, I'm not responsible for that. We're only responsible for our emotions, our thoughts, our actions, and our choices, what's inside our fence. Other people's emotions, choices, and problems are outside our fence. People will often say, she made me feel bad, or he made me angry, or the truth is no one climbs into our brains and makes us feel what we feel. Our emotions are a natural response to what other people say. We're responding, but what's actually happening is ours. And I do believe all feelings, all emotions are valid. We may have an emotional response to something that is very different than somebody else's emotional response. That doesn't make right or wrong. That's just our feelings. That's how we feel. What we do about our feelings, how we respond to our feelings, that's a different story. That I like sometimes just because we feel mad doesn't mean we can respond in a way that's not appropriate or not okay. But the feeling itself is valid. Okay, then we have our feelings about our feelings, and this is where it gets really fun for me because I love this, but it's complicated. We might feel determined when we think about setting a boundary, but we feel determined, and then we feel nervous about feeling determined because we know maybe we're ill-equipped. There's a thing I like to do when I'm counseling. We kind of go down under this iceberg. So the top is an iceberg, and you got your feelings about your feelings, your expectations, and so it's complicated. But the bottom line is we're responsible for our emotions and the way we respond to those emotions. So we're not responsible for others' emotions. So yeah, I guess I could have talked about this one for a really long time. But I think that's the bottom line. What's ours? What's not ours? Okay, so then the second one is clarify the boundary. You want to think objectively about what your limit or expectation is before you communicate it. Think about it when you're not emotionally dysregulated. Keep it simple, keep it specific, like I will not continue this conversation if yelling starts. So you're going to think about the boundary first, and then you're going to communicate the boundary. So I think it was in Lisa's book, that I read that relationships often end not because of conversations that happened, but because of conversations that needed to happen but didn't. And I thought that was kind of a profound little sentence there kind of succinctly describes sometimes what happens. So we want to speak the boundary. Once we've got a clear, simple idea of the boundary, we want to speak it with kindness, firmness, no drama. We want to use I statements such as I need or I feel. No one is born knowing how to communicate. Thankfully, we pick up some communication strategies along the way, but for a number of reasons, we're just not all good communicators. When I counsel couples who are struggling, sometimes the secret is just getting back to those basics. We practice using I statements. We practice reflective listening, which is listening to hear rather than listening to respond or taking, when is he going to be done talking so I can respond to what he's saying? You're actually listening to hear and understanding. So Joe did an excellent job talking about relationships. It's on YouTube, the Journey's YouTube page too, Journey Church's YouTube page. So basically, sometimes just a little skill building in the communication department can make all the difference. Use statements such as "You always cross my boundaries," "You always cross my boundaries." That can lead to defensiveness. I statements and gentle startups can get difficult conversations off to a good start. And that's whether you're talking to a coworker, a boss, a spouse, a child, whatever. Just those I statements. I've found that makes a huge difference. Okay, but then expect pushback. Stay calm. When you set a boundary, others may not like it. So you may, especially if it's a new boundary, or if you've been in a relationship that that typically doesn't have boundaries, expect others to flip their lid emotionally. They may, and that's why I think this is good too, because I can kind of see now, especially like with my grandkids, they're about to flip their lid. I can see their lid is fully flipped, and so then I know this is not the time to try to engage their cortical resources that will wait until they're regulated again. But yes, even if they're not regulated, we can stay regulated. We can keep our thinking brain intact even if somebody else doesn't. And this is easier if we've thought through some of these steps in advance. So the goal here, hold the line with calmness. We're not going to try to communicate a boundary when we're angry or not in control of ourselves. Enforce the boundary consistently. We want to follow through without rescuing, arguing, or apologizing. I'm a rescuer, so that's a tricky one. I think I'll cross it out. Actually, I'm going to... I am crossing it out. But that's hard, especially like for parents. You always want to rescue. Okay, then let consequences be natural whenever possible. So consequences should directly relate to the expectation, and they should be realistic. You can't say, if you do this, you're going to be grounded for life. That is not a realistic consequence. And it's good, especially if you're a parent, to kind of, or in any relationship, think through what the boundary expectation is and then what the consequence should be in a realistic way. Okay, then release the outcome. Your job is to manage your ranch, not to control how others react to the boundary. And that's a big one too. We need to accept the reality that it can be difficult when people feel disappointed, frustrated, upset. If they're not taking responsibility for their emotions, if there's conflict, it can be really hard, and we might think we've said it, we've done something wrong, and we're not always going to do it right, but sometimes we just have to accept that this is going to be hard, and I think accepting that it's going to be hard is, then if we're expecting it to be super easy, that's going to be more of a disappointment than our lid is flipped and then everything. So we just say, yep, this is going to be hard. Okay, and then we want to strengthen our boundaries over time. Setting and holding boundaries is a skill that grows stronger with practice. I once heard that we teach people how to treat us. And as we stay consistent, others will learn that we're serious, that we're wanting to be intentional about boundary setting, and relationships that were previously chaotic should now, theoretically, they should be more peaceful and satisfying. So I think I got the practical steps. Okay, this one, boundaries with children. I didn't know if we'd have a lot of parents. But I feel like it's really important. And some of this information is from Boundaries with Kids from Cloud and Townsend. That's a good book. Those books they're old. They were written, I think, in the 90s. But the information is still, some of it's still really good and relevant. So the 3 realities. So I took this directly from one of their books. I modified them a little bit to kind of, I don't know, they were a little rigid, I thought. But okay, I'll tell you my version of it. So the 3 realities. First reality, your child is not perfect. Sometimes they really are causing legitimate problems. Sometimes they really are misbehaving or whatever. So we just want to accept that. And again, I think some of this is just thinking about it in advance. So we're not blindsided by, oh, I should have set a boundary. However, depending on the age and stage of the child, pushing boundaries is often a developmentally appropriate way of figuring out where boundaries are. My husband and I are always saying that to our son. We've got a 2-year-old. He's in the terrible 2s. It's not too terrible. He's pretty cute. But he'll do something, and my son will be like, why is he doing that? Well, it's developmentally appropriate for them to be doing that. That's how they figure out where the boundaries are. So it requires figuring this out. There's a lot of trial and error on the kid's part, on the parents' part. But just coming into it, your child's not perfect. Then the second part is remembering the problem isn't really the problem. Usually there's a need under the behavior. I think this is true with kids and with adults too. If somebody's having this behavior, there's something usually going on underneath. Like a temper tantrum at Walmart doesn't mean your child has oppositional defiant disorder. It might mean they're hungry, tired, overstimulated. That old HALT, we learned this a long time ago when our kids were, well, we had a kid in counseling, and the counselor taught us about HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so it doesn't excuse bad behavior. I mean, a temper tantrum at Walmart isn't good. But if your child is hungry, they're going to be a little bit more vulnerable or tired or overstimulated. They might be a little more vulnerable. And we're not, you respond differently to a hungry child than you do to a tired child. Hungry child gets food, tired child gets a nap. So just understanding, remembering the second of the 3 realities is the problem isn't really the problem. Okay, the third reality is, and this one, some of these things when I read them, I'm still like, really? But the Cloud and Townsend say, parents need to remember that time does not heal all. So I know this is true in a lot of contexts, but I think what they're meaning when they wrote this is that sometimes good-willed parents were earnestly desiring to love our kids and see the need under the behavior, and then we don't enforce healthy boundaries. And we just think, oh, it's just going to work out. And hopefully it does. But there's no guarantee. And so we want to make sure that while we're doing all this thing and juggling all these balls in the air, we also don't want to neglect setting healthy boundaries. So time does not heal all. That was the third reality, they said. Okay, so the second good thing for setting boundaries with children is being intentional about our own mental health. That helps us with that juggling act a little bit. We want to model healthy boundaries and growth. This comes out of prioritizing our own mental health. We want to evaluate and plan according to age and stage. Parents can educate themselves regarding what's appropriate for each age and stage. Lots of good resources out there. Unfortunately, when you've got little kids, you don't have as much time to read all the resources or watch all the videos or whatever. And then you learn all this stuff when your kids are grown up. But that's kind of how it works. But there are lots of resources out there. So we want to give choices within limits. Again, a mistake I made with my little kids. I'd sometimes give too many choices, or I'd expect my small children to reason through the choices. I'd sometimes forget that their little brains couldn't synthesize all that information, especially when their lids are flipped and they're not even thinking anyway. So you just want to really limit the amount of choices. When our kids were little too, they just came up with our oldest is 35 now, but it was use your words. And that was, I don't know, somebody thought of it back then in the 90s, I guess. So we were really adamant about use your words, use your words. Well, again, when their lid is flipped and they're on the floor at, the grocery store, they're not going to be using their words. So it's not a good time to say, do you want the red popsicles or the blue popsicles or whatever. You just really want to be appropriate of what they can take in at the time. So we want to present the problem, the expectations, the consequences, and plan. This is another thing we learned gradually. As problems and expectations change, it's okay to change the boundary, to change the consequence or whatever it is. It's okay to do that. It's okay to say, and Dad and I are trying out a new thing right now. But I do think sometimes well-meaning parents who are learning and growing, they forget to clue their kids in. And so it's important to say, okay, this is how it used to be. Starting today or starting tomorrow, we're going to make this change. We don't want to over-explain or lecture, but I didn't know you could do that. And you can. I mean, they know something's going to be different now. And if you just surprise them and expect them to roll with it, that's not quite as effective as saying, okay, this is a new thing. So we want to follow through over time. Remember, parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. Parents are in it for the long haul, and just teaching kids to obey is definitely not the goal. Parenting with boundaries is about moving children from external control, us managing them, to internal control, them managing themselves. So we can teach our kids that they're responsible for their feelings and behaviors and what's on their ranch, and then these kids will thrive. They'll have healthy relationships, and they'll thrive in healthy relationships. Okay, so that's our little grandson. So there's a boundary. The door is a boundary. Okay, so next slide. Okay, this one. Okay, signs of boundary violations. They happen when someone crosses into our ranch without permission. These violations can be direct or they can be subtle. They can be intentional or unintentional. They can be confusing when someone tries to make us responsible for their emotions, behaviors, or problems. So here are some signs that someone might be crossing your boundary. They ignore your no. You say no, they apply pressure, guilt, or keep asking. You can remind yourself that saying no is not rejecting the person, but rejecting what feels harmful to our well-being. So this goes both ways, too. If somebody is setting a boundary and I feel rejected, I can just try to remind myself that they're not rejecting me, they're just setting a boundary that is going to protect their well-being and their needs. Okay, if somebody minimizes your feelings or needs, they might act like your emotions, needs, or limits are silly, dramatic, or selfish. And they might be. Sometimes our needs might be, somebody else might legitimately think that our need is silly. Doesn't matter. If it's our need, and if it's based on how we feel, it's a boundary crossing as somebody is trying to minimize it. It's not up to them what we need or what we don't need. If somebody tries to make us feel responsible for their emotions, if they're upset, you suddenly feel like it's your job to fix their feelings or to make them happy, that's probably a sign that a boundary violation has occurred. If they try to use anger, guilt, or manipulation to get their way, like yelling, silent treatment, passive aggressiveness, or guilt trips, we can overcome any inappropriate feelings of guilt by better understanding what is triggering or what is underneath our feelings. So that kind of comes back to what is going on underneath. If someone punishes us for having boundaries, they might withdraw love or threaten consequences or act cold when we stand up for ourselves. That's a sign that they might be crossing our boundaries. Or they test our limits after we've already stated them. Instead of respecting our boundary, they poke, question, or push against it. Of course, we kind of talked about this. Sometimes people will. And does that mean they're bad or wrong for doing that? It might be developmentally appropriate, or it might mean that we waited too long to set this boundary. And so then there's some self-reflection and other things that we need to do. But this is just kind of if somebody's testing our limits after we've stated them, there may be a boundary crossing. Okay, or if we feel drained, unsafe, or resentful around them. Your body will often tell you something's wrong even before your brain catches up. So that could definitely be another boundary crossing. Just because something feels true, I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, I would tattoo this one on my head, I think. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is true. So Katie talked about cognitive distortions and important ways to test thoughts that feel true but may not be true. But if somebody's response to a boundary we've set feels disrespectful, draining, or dismissive, it's worth paying attention to. So we often tolerate boundary crossings due to fear of rejection, conflict, desire to maintain relationships at the cost of personal health, fear of disappointing or breaking commitments. So those are some signs of boundary violations. Again, I feel like I should say, just because somebody's doing some of these things, it doesn't automatically mean there's a boundary violation. There's got to be grace and understanding and empathy and all this stuff. But if we can kind of tell sometimes, and we might ignore some of those red flags or those signs, and so pointing them out hopefully will be helpful. Okay, so slide 10. Oh yeah, what ifs? Oh, okay, yeah, what if I'm the one ignoring my boundaries? And that is a thing. We've talked a lot about why we tolerate boundary crossings. Hopefully some of these talking points will lead to just increased self-awareness. We can go back to the ranch metaphor. We can ask ourselves, whose ranch is this? Am I carrying something that's actually somebody else's responsibility? Am I trying to manage or control someone else's ranch? Am I worrying about their feelings, choices, or reactions more than my own in a way that is really dismissive to my own feelings and choices and reactions? Am I allowing someone else to manage or control my ranch? Am I letting someone dictate how I feel, what I should do, or what I should believe? Are my gates open when they should be closed? Am I letting someone have too much access to my heart, my time, my energy, without enough trust or safety? Am I closing my gates when they should be open? Am I pushing good, trustworthy people away out of fear? What is actually my responsibility right now? So I want to focus on what's inside my ranch, my emotions, my needs, and my choices. What if I'm the one ignoring someone else's boundary? Okay, this is where healthy self-reflection is really good, and maybe we'll all leave here today and we'll all be a little bit better at respecting boundaries. When someone sets a boundary, it might feel like a personal rejection of our needs or wants. But again, just because something feels true doesn't mean it is true. And we're responsible for how we respond to somebody else's boundary. What if it's time to let go of the relationship? So in her book, Lisa Turkhurst talks about letting go of toxic relationships. Some of you may be familiar with her, and she's had a lot in her life, and so this is a subject that she really writes a lot about. And if there are toxic relationships in your life, this book is super good. But she points out that there are times when maintaining boundaries means cutting ties with people who continually disrespect them. So healthy boundaries sometimes involve ending relationships or distancing ourselves from harmful people. It should not be done lightly, especially when important relationships hang in the balance. And every relationship is different, so there's a lot to balance here. But she makes a point, and I wrote out her quote, she's not advocating for a quick and easy pathway to ghosting friends, no longer seeing your parents, or quickly divorcing your spouse. Processing a possible goodbye isn't permission to peace out or tap out. It's a pathway toward grieving and accepting one of the toughest realities we will ever face, an unsustainable relationship. So it's certainly abusive and unhealthy relationships require a lot of support and safety, and there's a lot, and we always advise people to seek out support, and certainly you should not stay in an abusive or unhealthy relationship. But then there's a lot of gray area, too. So sometimes there's no gray area. Abusive relationship, there's no gray area. But if there's a relationship where you're just both two good-willed people are trying to figure things out, then that's a different situation entirely. So I guess the last one is, what if I'm a work in progress? Good news, you are, I am, we all are. Boundaries are an act of love for ourselves and for those we care about. And when we live with clear, kind limits, we invite deeper trust, freedom, and flourishing in every relationship. So that would be another good tattoo. It'd be kind of long, but it would be a good one to remember. So let's see, what do I got next? We're done. Okay, yeah, so these are the references. These are just some of them. Some of them I just had in my mind. I have some books I brought too. There's some good, Dan Siegel has some good books about boundaries with children, writing the Yes Brain Child, and he's got a bunch of other ones. But yeah, those are my references, and I think we have a slide. The next slide has a QR code or something that if you guys want to do. Oh, that's another. I could have just put a bunch of pictures up of boundary crossing, funny little memes and stuff. But okay, yeah. So that's it. So I think we maybe can do question and answer. Bryce, is that good? Do you think?
Yeah, should we explain that questionnaire at all?
Will you explain it?
Yeah, if you can QR that on your phone, we'd like to get some feedback. City Care would love to get some feedback on the conversations we've had. So they do that with everybody that's speaking here. So if you want to do that, should we take maybe 5 minutes? And then we'll get back into the conversation.
Sure.
It'll give you some time to think of Q&A also. And then think about the tattoos she recommended. All right?
I won't do that, Mom.
So
I won't do that.
We'll take 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm going to drink of water.
Hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to do some of that processing and figuring out which tattoo is going to look best on you. We'd love to just open it up to some Q&A time, and I'll bring the mic to you if you got a question. Okay.
You talked about you have some experience with autistic children.
Yes.
And so my question is I have a grandson that is possibly on the spectrum.
Okay.
He's 13
Okay.
and doesn't socialize.
Mm-hmm.
But we have trouble with boundaries with him. He doesn't seem to get it. Can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
boundaries with autistic?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, it's tricky because, well, and I guess there's so many different boundaries. So the general answer is because often somebody who's on the spectrum, their brain works differently, they experience boundaries very differently than they call them, like a neurotypical person is somebody who's not on the spectrum, and a neurodivergent person is somebody who is on the autism spectrum. So I guess maybe I should ask this. Is there a specific boundary that, like, is it a social boundary, or what kind of boundary maybe do you think?
Social.
Social.
Yeah.
Maybe too social or not social?
Not social.
Not social.
And just not comfortable in surroundings with
Yeah.
people and
Yeah. Well, and that could be like a sensory overwhelm. Maybe he's overloaded by things, and so his lid is probably flipped a lot.
okay.
And years and years ago, they used to think that people on the autism spectrum just didn't experience emotions. Well, yeah, now we know they really do experience emotions. It's just they can be very overwhelming. I kind of sometimes think about like looking at the sun without sunglasses. Like a neurotypical person might have sunglasses, where maybe a neurodivergent person is just seeing the sun, just staring at the sun. And so it might be that hand-brain thing model might be good, just because it might help you see the behavior under, or the need under the behavior. Is he overwhelmed or overstimulated? And yeah, we have a son and a grandson on the autism spectrum, so I think that's maybe one of the reasons I feel I love this population so much. And I think it was Stephen Shore who said, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. So everybody's got a different challenge, and certainly a different strength too. There's a lot of strengths that go with that. But especially when it comes to social, or if they know in their mind somewhere that they're not good in social situations, or they don't understand social cues or things like that, that can also be overwhelming. And they can just have anxiety, even just the thought of being in a social situation. So it might be external stimulation, it might be internal stimulation that's causing him to maybe be a little bit dysregulated. So when I work with kids, especially at 13, that age, we really talk about identifying emotions, labeling emotions, because if they have no idea what's going on, it's hard to respond in a way. But sometimes just teaching what is that emotion. We've got little feeling wheels or emotion wheels, and this is when you feel mad, this is what happens. So sometimes that can help with the overwhelm, and then they can engage better. I don't know, does that answer any of that? Okay. Thank you for that question. I love talking about people with autism. That's my passion. So, not boundaries. Boundaries is not my passion. But but we made it through. So, okay.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah.
So my question would be, how would you guide someone whose parent is not necessarily forcing them, but guilting them into getting together? And they're doing it in a loving way, but trying to set boundaries with them is very difficult.
Yes. That's a big question, too. That's also a great question. And I think it's kind of common. I think it happens sometimes, and more often in families. So I think the steps first, understanding why you're setting that boundary. Is it coming from a healthy place? Do you just need time? You need time with your nuclear family, or or is there some kind of bitterness underneath that you just don't want to be with this person, or resentment? I mean, those are would be two very different causes for why you don't want to, why somebody wouldn't want to get together. So understanding why we're setting our boundary, what's underneath it, and if we kind of think through it and it really is a legitimate boundary, I think it's okay to communicate it. I know sometimes people will quickly write off parents or something. They'll say, well, they don't respect my boundaries, so they don't get to see my grandkids. That's not healthy. That's not it. But I do think it's okay to say, we've got this boundary, and this is why, and I need you to respect it. I don't know. That's an easy answer, I guess. And actually doing it is quite a bit harder. But I suppose if there's some reluctance, or if there's a hindrance in setting the boundary, figuring out what that is might help you, like, figure out what the boundary is, why the boundary is needed, and then you can communicate it more objectively. And
So you think to communicate it with the person is?
I think so, yeah. I mean, maybe not in all situations, but to say, if they're guilting you into getting together, I mean, maybe you don't have time or energy, or maybe you don't enjoy those people. I know somebody recently talked to me about purple families, where they've got, there's so much political conversation. There's people on this side and people on this side. There's red and blue, and their family's purple. And they said, it's hard to be in a purple family, because whenever we get together, there's all this talk that's very uncomfortable. And this person I was talking to didn't want to be in that situation. And I think that's okay to say, I'd like to be in this situation. I love you guys, but sometimes it's really hard when there's political talk or all this conflict. And I'm just not going to be there if we can't agree to not talk about these kinds of things. Sometimes that looks like avoidance, like I'm avoiding people that I don't want to be around, and it can be, and that avoidance, of course, isn't healthy. But if we're coming from a place of, this is just a boundary, and this is really what I want, and what I don't want, and what's healthy for me, and I think it's okay to say that. I don't know.
So what about setting boundaries for young children, like under the age of 2, and they're just learning to talk, and like that's definitely a patience thing.
It is definitely a patience thing, for sure. Our 2-year-old, he's at that stage, and he's smart, so he knows what he wants, but he can't always communicate it. And so I think consistency is important. I think identifying in advance with everybody who's involved in this child's care, like, this is what we tolerate, this is what we don't tolerate, this is the consequence if the expectation isn't met. I was not good at this when my kids were little. I just wasn't, and it's very hard. But I know now, and if I could go back and just know that when I'm dysregulated, nobody wins. So if there's a boundary, and I've clearly communicated it, and there's no ice cream in the living room, and now there's ice cream all over the couch, this is not the time to have a conversation about that. I need to get my lid back on, my brain, integrated again. And I don't know if that answers your question, but other than to say, I feel it for you. It can be tricky. Are you the mom?
I'm the mom, yeah.
Yeah.
Those meltdowns are hard. And then, because he's so smart and he knows what he wants, and I'm always like, okay, let me give you a couple options. Or
Yeah.
He gets mad and starts hitting and just.
Yeah.
He's very defiant and very independent, and that's me. And so I get it.
Yeah.
And I get him.
Yes.
But I'm like, I was not ready for this. And then we've had meltdowns because we're both like, trying to.
Yeah.
It's World War X sometimes. I feel like it's WWE.
What goes
I'm not
around
winning.
comes around. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's fine.
Okay, so this is, and when I first learned about this hand-brain thing, one of the videos I watched, because I watched 100 of them, was a preschool teacher, and she was talking about how she introduces this to her little preschool kids. And she said, she described a time once when somebody came up to her little kid, he was maybe a little older than 2, but I think he's 3 or 4, but came up and just said, Miss, 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 and he had no words, so like it wouldn't have helped to say, use your words, because he didn't have words, but he knew his brain was offline, his lid was flipped. And so what she said she did, and of course, it's easy, she could say she did it, but it probably wasn't quite this easy, but she said she was able to just kind of get down on his level and say, what do you need? And then just help him just kind of calm his own nervous system, his own body, which is hard if somebody's throwing a temper tantrum and they're going all over. But theoretically, it should work. That's not the time when we set a boundary or, talk or whatever. We just, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for, I guess, like, I'm pretty good about that. I feel like my husband, he tries, but then I feel like he goes straight to like, we don't do that. You're
Yeah.
naughty, the reaction versus like letting him also calm down for a second. So I think there's both of them need to just come back to their
Yeah.
self.
Yeah.
And then they can, yeah.
Find a hand-brain model video that you like and show it to your husband. That's what I did to my husband. I showed him.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And not all the videos are good. Some of them are kind of cringy, but some of them are really good. And so,
And
yeah.
I think it would be good. I mean, we go to a chiropractor who they focus, it's at Radiant Life over by Old Mill. And
Okay.
they focus on how your brain connects to your nervous system.
Oh, good,
And if
yeah.
something is not right, your body has symptoms.
Yeah.
And so, like, we know how that all, like, kind of, like, works and all.
Okay.
It gets to be a lot sometimes.
It does.
I guess I have a question probably for more, like, pastor, like, wise. So I'm super, like, big in my faith, and it's hard for me when I'm a feeler, and I really feel people, I'm empathetic, and then I'm always trying to, like, love people like Jesus did, and so it's hard for me to set boundaries in ways where it's like, the Bible tells you, like, turn the other cheek for your enemies and, like, love them through everything and pray for them and all this stuff. And I know I can do that stuff and do it healthy, but it's like sometimes I just feel bad for people, and then I just want to be like Jesus and love them through it. So that's hard for
Yes.
me to set boundaries with
Yes.
people that don't deserve it,
I
So
so get that. And Bryce, you may have
Yeah, I mean,
That's a difficult one.
yeah, and I've been there, I think, and I've also talked with people that have gotten way over invested. And it starts good, and it starts from a right heart. I think what you have to come to the point where you realize that you're not their sole everything. You definitely want to point them to Jesus, and also the larger body, the community. Don't be their sole caregiver, because that puts you into more of a Messiah complex. Even when you have a good heart, you've got to have boundaries, because they shouldn't have unlimited access to any time they want to get a hold of you and all that. So I've seen all that before. That's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for them. So you let them know when you're available. I think that's the better route to go. Let them know when you're available, and know that what you're doing with them, you've still got a good heart. You care about them. Your level of care is not determined by the hours that you spend with them. And so, yeah, sometimes it's hard to enforce that, but if you let them know in advance, so.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think too, when I read, there's a difference between pleasing people and people pleasing. I think it comes down to our motivation, if we're giving or if we're giving in. And I think that's a strength, to care for people and want to be like Jesus and just feel empathetic and be a feeler. Those are strengths. But if we're exhausted by that relationship, or if we get a little bit resentful, or if we have, somebody calls and we're like, oh no, not that person again, that's not, Jesus wouldn't have done that. so yeah, it's a tricky line. And I think that is really why, the whole boundaries thing was tricky for me, because I thought it was about being mean. And actually, no, it's about being loving. And that's a lesson I'm still learning. So, yeah.
I was thinking grandparents didn't have to enforce any boundaries. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought that was a parent thing. Anyway.
It can get complicated. Yeah.
Anybody else? There we go.
Can you talk about resetting boundaries after they've potentially been broken, trying to heal from broken boundaries. How do you, if you set a boundary, they break a boundary, how do you then rebuild the trust, reset a boundary? And I'm thinking specifically in, I mean, it would apply to all relationships, but I'm thinking specifically in romantic ones.
Yeah, that is so hard because it takes so long to build trust, and it can be broken in a second. And so I think that happens often in romantic relationships. Maybe there's a
Such close quarters.
yeah. So what's the short answer? I mean, certainly grace, we got grace, but we don't want to enable the person to continue. I really like that we teach people how to treat us, and that was something one of my sisters taught me years and years ago. I think you learned from your counselor. And I think if we teach people it's okay to keep breaking trust, they will continue to break trust. And so, gosh, Joe is our relationship expert. Can you speak to this? Do you want to speak to this? I didn't want to talk about boundaries.
I feel like you're crossing a boundary here.
I might be.
Yeah. Can you repeat your question?
So how do you reset boundaries, right? When you have a boundary and that boundary has been broken, specifically in somewhere where you're in relatively close quarters, right? So it's not like you can just take a break, not see that person for a while, get a little space, right? Because you're in really close quarters in
Yeah.
marriage or a romantic relationship of some sort. How do you come back from that, reset those boundaries, and hold them and rebuild trust again coming out of that?
Yeah. No, okay. That makes sense to me. So when we're talking about trust and boundaries, there's a dance that goes on. And the way I understand it, the person who's broken the boundary, they have a responsibility. So their part of the dance is to earn back trust by showing their behavior has changed and there's remorse. The other side of the dance is the person who's been hurt, and they have to get to a place, a posture, if you will, where they're willing to receive the efforts that the one who broke trust is trying to do to get it back. And if we can't receive that, it doesn't matter what the person who broke trust does from this point forward, it will never be acknowledged. So there has to be this dance that goes on back and forth. Typically, when trust has been broken, I think the first step is figuring out if I can forgive, because if I can forgive, it opens a door to let me choose if I want to walk into a new trusting relationship. If I can't open that door, it doesn't matter what happens. So I would encourage you, as you reset a new boundary, focus on whether or not you can forgive individually to open the door, and then see if there are ways that you can tell this person, here's how I'll acknowledge you rebuilding trust, and I will receive that in this arena as long as you do that. But I'm not going to automatically give it back to you because trust is not given, it has to be earned. That would make the most sense to me. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.
There's
Any-
somebody in the back.
Oh. There we go.
Could you just read the first one?
Yes, I'm going to read this here. What do you do when your friends don't let you say your feelings or have hard conversations because they believe God wouldn't want that?
Huh. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a really hard situation. So God wouldn't want you to have hard feelings, or God wouldn't want you to express hard feelings?
Probably express hard feelings.
Express hard feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay. I think that's a good question. So if you're Christian and you're following Jesus, you should be happy and not have hard feelings. Maybe I might be oversimplifying the question. Okay, this to me comes back to all of our feelings are valid. And if you want to clarify this, just go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, if you need to clarify anything. No?
Okay. All feelings are, all of our emotions are valid. Like I may be completely scared of frogs, which I'm not. I love frogs. But that would be a very valid emotion if I'm scared of frogs. Somebody else might say, that's ridiculous. Frogs are so cute, and they're just little, and they're adorable, and that is true. But if I was scared of that, my feeling would be valid. And so I think some of it comes down to just and it's hard to teach our friends, what's right, especially as you're kind of growing up and trying to figure out what's right yourself. But I think it's okay to sometimes just say, maybe if a friend is expressing their feelings, it's okay to say, your feelings are valid. You don't have to agree with the thought, or you don't have to say, yes, I feel exactly the same way, but just saying your feelings are valid, that can kind of maybe set the stage in friendships for it's okay to have feelings. And I think too, certainly, Jesus had hard feelings. Jesus cried. Jesus got angry. So Jesus experienced negative emotions. And so I just feel like there's sometimes a misconception that if we're Christ followers, we're just supposed to be happy all the time and not talk about hard things. So I don't know what you would do. You could set a boundary and decide you're not going to talk about hard things with your friends. That would kind of protect your mental health. You could set an internal boundary, or you could set and just be with those friends but not talk about hard things, or you could set an external boundary and just choose not to be with those friends. That's harder though. Or the third thing, you could state your boundary. You could clarify your boundary in your mind. Think about something, and then you could say to your friend, I really like it when we talk about hard things, or I really like it when you help me when I'm saying something that's difficult, rather than, you never let me talk. That's a you statement. But an I statement is, I really like it when I can talk about hard things with you, and then that might also, change the dynamic of the conversation. Does that answer it? Does that give you something? Okay. I statements are huge. They're so important. You say a you statement, you're a jerk. Somebody says, I'm not a jerk. And then it's all about them defending themselves from being a jerk. But if you say, I feel disrespected when you talk to me that way, then they might go, oh, well, that wasn't my intention. I didn't want you to feel disrespected. It's such a subtle thing, but it can make a big difference. So, okay.
Anyone else? Maybe I can bring something up. This word codependency kept hitting my mind as you were talking. What's the connection between codependency and boundaries?
Okay, so I thought somebody might ask this question. I didn't put Bryce up to it. But so I actually wrote out the definition because it's complicated, and I don't always love that word. But this was the definition when I Googled it. So codependency is a relationship dynamic where one person excessively relies on another for emotional support, often sacrificing their own needs in the process. It typically involves an imbalance of power where one partner, known as the giver, enables the other, who's the taker, often leading to unhealthy one-sided relationships. So if somebody is codependent, and some of you guys may understand this differently than I do, because I think there's so much more involved than just saying, oh, that's just codependent behavior. But I think if my happiness is dependent on this person's happiness, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure they get to a place of happiness or whatever, healthiness or whatever it is that they need. And if they're not a healthy person because they're taking advantage of me or just for a number of different reasons, they're never going to be happy. And I'm going to continue to walk on eggshells. I'm going to continue to do what I think they need me to do. Okay, so what do you think, Bryce? Is that?
Yeah, so I think what it's leading me toward is then the codependent needs to put in boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
However, and this is kind of a saying that counselors know by heart, people that come to counseling are in counseling because of the people that won't go to counseling. And so sometimes it's very hard. You may say, okay, this is bad behavior, I'm codependent, I'm enabling, I'm going to put in some boundaries, and I'm going to do this. And if the other person isn't in a place to receive those boundaries, it can be really complicated. Yeah, okay. But it doesn't mean it's still not important to set the boundaries. Like in a perfect world, we identify our needs, we express our needs are met. But clearly we don't live in a perfect world. So if we identify our needs and express our needs, even if our needs aren't met, it's still good. It's still better than never identifying or expressing our needs. So the goal is to have our needs met. But that doesn't always happen, especially if our needs don't align with somebody else's needs, or we just have different opinions. But identifying a boundary and setting a boundary might be the best you can do, and it might make a difference.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking that one. That's a tough one. That's the only one I was worried about somebody asking.
Great. Anybody else? We don't want to end on that question. Come on, somebody
Good
else.
question.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, how about like parents and how they're enabling their adult children?
Oh.
What's your
A lot-
example? What's your example?
Not you.
No, you, a different adult child.
I'm like,
So I have a very close friend, and her 30-some-year-old is living with them right now. But recently quit a job, and to me, so much of what I'm seeing is enabling,
Yeah,
and to help guide her through that process, because we've talked about enabling
yeah.
without overstepping boundaries.
It's so tricky. And you don't, yeah, well, maybe if she's a good friend, you do know her intention. Is her intention coming from a healthy place or an unhealthy place? Is she so afraid that her child, is it coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of, okay, I'm just going to help this child until they get on their feet, or it might be a combination.
It comes from a place of fear.
Yeah,
So not knowing where he might end up living,
Yeah.
could he possibly, if he doesn't stay there, then he might live in his car, or
yeah. And like, easy for me to say, but maybe a few weeks in his car might, I mean, easy for me to say,
Amen.
not when you're the parent of that
Right.
child. Yeah, when we rescue our kids from potential consequences that could actually be good and change the trajectory of what's happening, we're kind of robbing them of opportunities and robbing them of, and I've done it myself too. I was the mom who was always taking homework up to the grade school because my kid would forget their homework, and finally a teacher said, no, you can't do this. So, yes, but an adult child, you still feel the responsibility, you still love the child, and you really have none of the control over what that child is going to do with their life, unless they're living in your house. So, I don't know. Are they recording? Is somebody recording this? Okay, you could, well, maybe you don't want to. you could just, have them watch it. That Good Boundaries, it was really good. Like I said, I was reluctant to read it, that Lisa Turker's book. I know a lot of people maybe are familiar with her, and I think it's a newer book. But it's not just about romantic relationships. She talks about friendships and parenting and things like that. There's some really good points in there. Maybe you give it to her as a Mother's Day present. Yeah, it's so tricky. It's tricky. But I think, I was going to use this example before. We sometimes go to Kobe Steakhouse, and everybody in my family loves shrimp, and I hate shrimp. And so, at Kobe's, they're throwing the shrimp at you, and they throw it. And so we're all there, we're all having the same experience, but I'm sitting there fearful. Like my husband's loving it, bring on the shrimp. And even the little kids, bring on the shrimp. But, so we're all in the same room, at the same table, but we're experiencing what's happening very different. Like, I don't want to catch it. I don't want it to land on my face. I don't want it to land on my glasses. I don't want it to get grease on my shirt. And so, you want to catch it. I know, and you always catch it, and I don't catch it. But I think that's, so kind of what's underneath is really important. I can sit there with a smile on my face, and hopefully this is relevant. It's relevant in my mind, but I can sit there with a smile on my face and feel fear, and somebody next to me can sit there with a smile on their face and feel excited because they're going to get some shrimp thrown at them. And we're in the same exact situation. And so for her too, maybe just for parents in general, like what's underneath? Is it from fear? Am I preventing my child from experiencing some natural consequences that might actually be helpful in guiding my child? Or is it, it could be any number of things, but figuring out what's underneath sometimes is good. I don't know, is that a good answer? I didn't know I'd be talking about shrimp in response to that question, but I wanted to get that in. Yeah, there's one more.
Can you talk a little bit about setting boundaries with like preteens and when the other parent doesn't agree or
That's so hard.
help you at all with the boundaries,
Yes.
especially in situations of divorce?
Oh, gosh, yeah, especially when you're co-parenting, but from different places and maybe with completely different ideas. That is so tricky. Yeah, hopefully most of you will just leave feeling affirmed, even if you don't get your question answered. But I would say, and I have some experience working with people in this situation, I think coming up with the boundaries and the expectations and the consequences, not in the heat of the moment. It might be something that's even put in the parenting plan somehow, or a mediator kind of talking through, if this happens, then this happens. I know you can't prepare for every situation, but if they are clearly laid out and documented, and then if they're violated or broken, you can at least go back to, well, this was the parenting plan, this was the agreement. So I guess the advice would be, do whatever you can in advance. I know that no boundaries. Oh, that's so hard because, yeah, I don't know. Bryce, have you worked with people in that situation?
Well, I think you do what you need to do as a parent.
Yeah.
And it's tough because especially if a preteen is getting all that freedom with the other parent, it's going to feel really unfair because you're taking the heat for standing your ground, for putting in your boundaries, and they're doing some pretty easy parenting. But I guess you have to think long term and go, you know what, if I do what I need to be doing right now with my daughter, as difficult as it is, stick to the boundaries, trusting that God is going to mature her, and someday she'll look back and she will see more security that she had with you than she did with the other parent. So that'd be my thought.
That's good. Yeah, long term. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And get support for sure, because other people have been there.
Tough stuff.
Yeah, it is.
These are good questions
Yeah,
tonight, man.
such good questions.
Some of these are like stumpers. I
Yeah.
mean, you can tell
They are.
it's a tough conversation
It
because
is.
implementing boundaries into everyday life and all the differing circumstances takes a lot of thought, takes a lot of prayer, and sometimes it may not look like it's even going in a good direction. But you got to do what's right, and putting in boundaries is the right thing to do. The Bible's filled with boundaries, isn't it? Our God created boundaries. You know, He created boundaries for the sea. I mean, all that stuff. So it's a good topic. It's a good thing to really ask God for wisdom in that, in every situation that you have. So I know we've run over time here, but that was still good.
Okay,
That's still good.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And
guys.
why don't we just give a big thank you to Wendy here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Let's. I'm going to close this out with prayer, and obviously you can have conversations afterwards too. So, Father in heaven, thank you so much. We thank you for your Holy Spirit that guides us and directs us. And Lord, even in some of these conversations tonight, Lord, help us to learn how to implement what you want us to do in our everyday relationships. Give us wisdom. Lord, give us determination. Give us courage where it requires courage. Strengthen us. And Lord, implementing boundaries is a challenging and difficult thing. But Lord, give us the moral determination. Give us the confidence that we are doing what is right. Confirm that in our own hearts. Lord, help us to implement whatever we implement with grace and love and truth. And so, Lord, I just ask for everyone here tonight in all our circumstances, I just pray that you would go before us and lead and guide us. So thank you for this evening together. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.